a holy God would want anything to do with us. And not only want anything to do with us, but to love us. And not only just to love us, but allow us to serve him. You know, this is, I think I might actually, if I'm all right to ask this, I might have you guys sing that when we're done here. I think that's, it's very fitting. You know, think about that point of salvation. When we're talking about this truth, and we talked about George Whitefield and how the Lord used him and how this country didn't have it. Think about your own testimony for just a second. Think about the years, I don't know, I'll just use my own testimony for a second, but the years that I had spent in angst, knowing that I wasn't saved, knowing that I was lost. And I can think of moments and points in my life where the Holy Spirit was drawing. And that is the most true feeling you will ever feel in all this world. Sin has its pleasures, and sin will try to pull you into the sinful pleasures of this life, but there's nothing more real than the power of God. That's right. And there's nothing more real than that moment when you accept him into your heart. There's nothing more real. It's unmistakable. That's greater than anything this world can offer you. And sadly, these songs break our hearts, and we listen to them and we think about how much we fail, and how much we fail day to day, and how we're always, we have this interaction with the truth at the point of salvation, and we let God down continually, and so we constantly have to keep begging for him to come back and rescue us, and come back and Lord, just use me. Clean me up and use me. And the fact that he would have the grace and the love for you and I, that he would actually answer that prayer. Because life is so short. Life is so short. And we need every ounce, every second in this life that we can get. We shouldn't waste a second of it. After salvation, we still need the truth. Every day, every morning, we still need that truth. Let's go to Proverbs 23:23, if we would, just for a second. I need a bigger pulpit. Proverbs 23:23, short and simple. Buy the truth and sell it not. Also wisdom and instruction and understanding. Why would anybody, after that song, why would anybody ever sell the truth? Why would you ever sell that truth? That interaction that you had with the Lord? I can think in my own personal life, and I think about my own salvation testimony and all the moments in my life. When I was about 16, I think 17 years old, even younger than that, I knew I wasn't saved, but it really was driven home when I was about 16 or 17 years old. I can't even remember all that the preacher was preaching about, but I just remember this in the middle of the service, like someone had dropped a boulder on my lap, and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was not saved. Beyond a shadow of it, I knew I wasn't saved. And so I wanted to do anything I could to get out of there because I felt claustrophobic. I'm thinking, is someone turning the heat up in this room? It's just hot in here. I just got to get out of here. I had to get out of the room, and then I couldn't wait. It felt like the longest service of my life. And finally, when the invitation came, I was gone, man. I was out of there. And the farther I got away from that auditorium, the heavier that feeling got. To the point where I got around behind the church. I could take you to the exact spot today. I got around behind the church and I pretty near collapsed. I was hyperventilating. I was crying so hard I knew I was lost. And I rejected, in my unrighteousness that we talked about earlier this week, I rejected that. I tried everything I could to usher that away, to push that away. But God was faithful. Amen. What am I worth? I'm worth nothing. I'm a nobody. But he was faithful. And when I did get saved, we heard the testimony already this week, so I won't repeat it, but I was thinking about it too with Nathan the other night, and when he came to me, he had that same angst, that same feeling. I could see it in his eyes, I could hear it in his voice. That he had the same angst, like he didn't know how to fix it. And when that night I got saved, it was dark out, and I've given this testimony. I'll give it 1,000 times if you let me. But it was so dark outside, I don't remember the moon shining at all. I don't remember the moon even being out. But when I came out from underneath that tent, I had never seen such a bright moon. I'm not trying to make this, I'm not trying to mysticize the event, but I just don't remember the moon shining before that. And when we came out, the moon was illuminating absolutely everything. And I thought, I have never seen such a bright sky. And when Nathan and I were sitting here, just right there the other night, the first thing he said is, wow, these lights are really bright. There's just something that the Lord does. When you interact with truth, something happens, and you are forever changed, and you'll never doubt that again. Amen. You cannot mistakenly guess whether or not you met with the Holy Spirit, that's for sure. When you engage with truth, it is unmistakable for anything else. So why would you sell that? Why would anybody sell that? You think about your testimony, why would you sell that? John 1:17 says, for the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. It came by, so we're given grace by Jesus Christ. It's the gift from him. But not only that, in John 8:32, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. So not only is it a gift, but it also frees you. Any one of us that's been saved can look at your life before salvation and feel that heavy load of bondage, that sin. It's bondage. And it makes you free. So it's free, it makes you free, and it's a gift from the Lord. So why would anybody sell that? Why would you sell that? Why would you throw any of that away? I think in a lot of the reasons, you can look in your life and you can look in the ministry. I can look literally about 90%. I would say that's probably being pretty close to honestly, even if not a little bit more than 90% of the men that I had looked to growing up are not even in church today. Completely walked away from the ministry. Why would you sell that? The God of heaven came down. I wish I could quote this. George Whitefield has a quote about how God came to man's level to give him a book, give him to write. Come down to man's level and write a book so you can understand it, and we won't even pick that up. Why would we sell any of that? The devil wants us to sell the truth, that's for sure. Anytime, I could point to any time a man that has left the ministry in my life, looking at these men that I had looked up to, and they leave the ministry, it has always affected me. And it has affected anybody that was in those circles. It's like truth takes a hit. The devil wants men to fall. And most of these men step away. There's so many reasons you step away, whether it's the ministries, it's full of heartbreak. You stand for truth, it's going to be full of rejection. There's 100 reasons that your flesh can come up with that will cause you to want to sell the truth. People are enough. We're pretty rotten. We're pretty rotten to each other. You say, what does this have to do with Baptist history? Well, we'll get to it. Let's go to Mark 5. Steal one of these waters. Let's go to Mark 5. Very familiar passage. Mark 5 and verse 25. And a certain woman, which had an issue of blood 12 years, and suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse. Can I take just a little bit of liberty with this passage real quick and just say the woman with the issue of blood? Every one of us, I think I heard Billy Graham say this once, every one of us is born with the disease of sin in our blood. Every one of us, from the moment we are born, from the moment little TJ was born, all these little kids that we see running around, from the moment we are in existence, we are diseased with this sin. And that sin is ultimately going to bring us to death. So as soon as you are born, you are on the path to death. So every one of us can liken ourselves in some way, somehow to this, and understanding that from the time we are brought into this world, we are plagued by this disease. And so this woman with the issue of blood, and you think about, this is a pretty familiar passage, but just put yourself in her shoes for just a minute. For 12 years. And if we're looking at Levitical law, she's not allowed to be around her family or people in general. We could hardly handle COVID for the few months, right? People need people. You need to interact with people. So this woman for 12 years, not allowed to be around anybody, especially not her family. For 12 years. And the only hope she had was with other people. How many times have we put our hope in things that turn out to be nothing? People tend to let us down. We tend to let each other down. So she's putting her hope in these physicians. She's putting all of her money in these physicians, hoping that somehow, some way, she'll be able to get back to her family with zero hope given. So not only that, she spent every dollar that she had. She had nothing left. Literally, this woman was at the bottom of the barrel at this point. She's got nothing. And all she wants is just a little relief. She wants to get back to her family. She wants to get back to living life. Verse 27, when she heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment. For she said, if I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the plague. That same feeling, that same angst you have in your life when you know you're not saved and you want to reach for salvation, you come up with all these truths. We talked about the my truth. That's what these physicians were for her. It was all these things that she wanted to put hope in. She wanted some sort of hope. She just needed something to get her back. And she put her hope in all these false things, these things that constantly let her down. People will constantly let each other down. It's just the nature of people. That's not meaning in general all people. But sometimes people just aren't all they're cracked up to be. Sometimes the devil likes to use people that are closest to us, and you think, wow, this is going to be great, and then that person turns around and stabs you in the back. And you put the hope of these friendships and this life that you had anticipated, this life that you had hoped for, and people just aren't all they're cracked up to be. That's what this woman understood. And so she came to this point, the same point we all get with the issue of blood, the sin that we have in our own lives when we meet Jesus. And in our own lives, we reach up and we exchange faith for virtue. There it is. If I set anything down, it is automatically lost. That is true. Ask my wife. I don't know if this is my water bottle.
It is now.
Me and Brother Kurtman are sharing that one. So let's get to Baptist history. We'll come back to this. So where we leave ourselves when we were talking yesterday about Connecticut, okay, and all the things that were happening in Connecticut, all of the divide between the new lights and the old lights, and these crazy people that are coming out in these churches. Here's the thing: when these people leave these churches, they're beginning to start. They're called separatists, right? They're the new lights, and they're starting their own meetings, private meetings. Okay? And so they're meeting privately. Now, under Connecticut law, there was a little bit of Toleration Act. In fact, you will find 4 or 5 Baptist churches in the state of Connecticut around the 1740s. The thing about the Toleration Act is this: you can have a church as long as you don't get too large. Once you become large and you start to pull people in, then we have an issue. And so you bring Whitefield into the mix, and these separatists are pulling out. There's a bit of toleration, but what happens is the Toleration Act gets repealed. They pull that back, so there's no more toleration in the state of Connecticut. Laws passed against unauthorized churches and itinerant preaching. So not only that, but they start to pass laws. You cannot itinerant preach. That's a George Whitefield thing. You cannot itinerant preach. You're not allowed to just go out there. You have to be approved. You can't have your own churches. Your church has to be authorized by the state. Why? Because if it's authorized, it's taxable. Unauthorized churches were considered unrecognized. Therefore, if you're unrecognized, you're taxed. So here's the thing. There's testimony to this. If you leave your church, you are going to be taxed because your church, the separatist church you're trying to create is not recognized. So therefore, you're going to be taxed back to the church you came out of. Not only that, but if you try to do meetings, so maybe you weren't starting a church, you just want to have Bible studies because you knew the truth. And this is the thing, and I said this yesterday. The separatists interacted with the Holy Spirit for the first time because salvation was finally understood. And the Holy Spirit spoke to them personally, on a personal level. So they thought, if the Holy Spirit's going to speak to me on a personal level, I can open the Scriptures and maybe the Holy Spirit will continue to teach me and speak to me. What a novel idea. We take that for granted, but that was revelatory in their day. They thought, oh my goodness, like if I didn't understand this, what else don't I understand? That was the mentality starting to be developed among these separates. And so they had to put a kibosh to this. You got to stop this because these people are growing in numbers and we're losing our congregations. We can no longer tax them. If we can no longer tax them, we can't live like we're living. We can't have the money we have. This is posing as a problem, right? And so you can't have these meetings because they're going to consider them unauthorized schools now. And so you can't be teaching people anything outside. So if you want to teach, if you want to have a church, you have to go to their approved colleges. You have to come out of their approved colleges with their stamp of approval, and then you have to start churches that are authorized by them teaching the doctrines that they give you. So the Toleration Act is completely gone. Okay? So here's the thing. George Whitefield, when he leaves the United States, the Great Awakening is in full swing. This is happening, man, and the Holy Spirit is pouring out everywhere he goes, massive crowds everywhere he goes. And when he returns, and we're going to specifically speak about Connecticut, because this is where the stronghold was. This is where things locked down the most, is in Connecticut. It's an interesting thing, and we'll go over it. But in 1745, George Whitefield tries to come back. He wants to come, he's on his way back to New England. He's going to do the same tour again. So he's going to go back to Connecticut right away. The authorities, so the administration of the congregations, all those that were in power over these churches had a meeting, and they banned specifically George Whitefield from preaching, itinerant preaching, in any one of the churches, or in any one of the towns. Specifically, George Whitefield. It's not like, oh, no itinerant preaching. It's like no itinerant preaching, but it's also no George Whitefield. You're not allowed. Remember the welcoming we talked about yesterday? We talked about people welcomed him in. They shut down the government for the day when George Whitefield came to town. They were happy to see George Whitefield. And so now those same places, Yale, he went to Yale to speak, and now Yale will not have him back. They're saying, nope, George Whitefield is not allowed. This is why I put on the bottom, this is cancel culture. Remember the rhyme? This is cancel culture. They are canceling George Whitefield from coming back to Connecticut. So this resolution of these churches is passed in 1745. So George Whitefield, he comes back. He is banned. He cannot return. He has a decision to make in 1745. I'm seeing a random water bottle. I'm thinking, wait, is this mine? If there's a year that America needs to know about, it's 1745. So, just before Whitefield returns to Connecticut, 13 separatists in the town of Norwich, and we talked about Whitefield had an incredible ministry in Norwich, Connecticut. Okay, so but at this time when he returns, this is about 4 years later. Everything's going on that we've talked about, and 13 separatists are being called back to their church. They've already left the church over this taxation issue, and they're about to be in prison. And they say, the 13 separatists, they call them back to the church in Norwich to explain their conduct. You have to come back and explain yourselves. Why did you leave our church? We need an actual answer. This is happening in 1745, the same year that George Whitefield is to return. Okay, let's go back to Mark. In verse 30, Jesus touched this woman and changed her life forever. Jesus touched George Whitfield and changed his life forever. Jesus touched you, if you are saved, and changed your life forever. Forever you are changed. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said unto him, "Thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, Who touched me?" And he looked round about to see her that had done this thing. Do you think Jesus knew who that was? Do you think he knew who that was? Jesus knew exactly who that was. He knew that she was, when he was a boy, he knew that that day would happen and she was going to be there that day. But he turns around and says, "Who touched me?" But the woman, fearing and trembling, under Levitical law, she could not be there. She wasn't supposed to be there. So, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. She declared 100% and all of the truth in that moment. Told him everything. What he was asking her to do was stand up and tell the people what was just done. So she came down and knelt before Jesus, and she bowed before him, and she told him all the truth. Now, why is this important to George Whitfield? Let's back up. Let's go just before this woman's story unfolds. Let's go to verse 22. "And behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet and besought him greatly, saying, Here's the thing, my little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, or she may be healed, and she shall live." So then Jesus goes and follows him, right? So this crowd that this woman is making her way through is Jairus' crowd. They're on their way to Jairus' house because he's in desperate need. And his daughter is on her deathbed. This girl's life, the future of this girl's life is at stake. And they need to get there quickly because she is on death's door. And so as they're on their way, this woman is there. This woman with the issue of blood is there. And she reaches out and he says, "Who touched me?" She tells him all the truth. In verse 35, let's jump over to that. "While he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain, which said, My daughter is dead. Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further?" There's no hope. There's no hope. Verse 36, here's the most important key verse here. "As soon as Jesus heard this word, it was spoken. He saith unto the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe." Be not afraid, only believe. And in that moment, this ruler of the synagogue was on his last breath too. He had no idea what to do. He was at a crossroads and he needed his daughter to be saved and to be saved now. And when the woman with the issue of blood shows up, the ruler of the synagogue is standing there and he's watching this whole thing unfold. And Jesus asks her, "Declare the truth. Stand up and speak the truth." And so she does, and she stands up. Even though she's not right, under Levitical law, she shouldn't even be there. She could be stoned or worse, I don't know. But she's not supposed to be there. But he's watching this. Jairus is watching this whole thing unfold and saying, this has to be something more than anything else. This has to be the Son of the living God. This has to be the one that they're talking about. He has to be the real deal. Her testimony is essential to the life of Jairus and the life of his daughter. Her testimony is essential in that. And so Jairus makes his way back home. Let's actually stop there and go here. When George Whitfield is banned, the law is not on his side. George Whitfield, if you think about it, if you could guarantee that you'd go and speak and have a ministry that would be full of tens of thousands of people and have many people crying at every invitation, and you could guarantee the fruit of your labor, would you not continue to do that? But what happens when that stops? What happens when that stops? That's the crossroad that he finds himself on. What happens when the faucet stops? And now you got to stand for something. Now your ego is going to be checked. Now you have to actually be challenged by what you really believe. Let me tell you this. I don't even have a lot of this in my notes, but I want to tell you this. In 1745, when those 13 separatists stood there in that church, in that congregational church, no, actually, they weren't even going to go. They were going to try to duck out. And then they heard that George Whitefield had decided that he was going to stick to his guns. And George Whitefield has said, I am indeed coming back to Connecticut. And he was going to continue to preach. He was going to continue to spread the gospel because this country had zero gospel and they needed New Testament salvation. So nothing deterred him. Nothing distracted him. And he pushed on. And these 13 separatists decided, if George Whitefield's going to come back, I'm going to stand before this congregational church and I'm going to tell them what I feel too. He gave them enough he emboldened them and made them brave, allowed them to step forward. So those 13 separatists, by the way, the head minister, his name was Dr. Lord. It's an interesting name. The Dr. Lord, which is the Lord over Norwich, the congregational church. And they stood there in front of Dr. Lord and they testified all that the Lord had done in their lives. Among those separatists that were emboldened by the ministry of George Whitefield was a woman by the name of Elizabeth Backus and her 17-year-old son, Isaac. Amen. Isaac Backus is the apostle of liberty.
Amen. That's right.
1745, that resolution is passed. And in 1745, Shubal Stearns is saved under the ministry of George Whitefield. In 1745, Daniel Marshall, his whole life is changed by the ministry of George Whitefield. Amen. You say, John, why are we sticking around Connecticut? George Whitefield preached all over the world because I believe for America, Connecticut is where the fulcrum was of George Whitefield's ministry. In fact, I would dare say, if George Whitefield did not push through and pursue the will of God over all fear, over all cancel culture, and said, I'm going to push through because this is what God given me, we wouldn't have a Sandy Creek revival. We wouldn't have Isaac Backus and his effect on John Leland. We wouldn't have religious liberty. You realize how important this year, 1745, was a pivotal year in the state of this nation.
That's right.
Yet nobody knows about 1745. Why would you sell the truth for a little bit of fear? Why would you sell the truth? Why would you sell anything that the Lord has given you? God has done so much. You think about all the things that God... Here's the thing about George Whitefield. I think, if I remember right, by this point, George Whitefield had only been saved like 10 years. Like 10 years. And he had traveled the country. Let's go back. Let's go back to Mark 5. Jesus goes with Jairus. He finishes this journey. He goes with Jairus back to Jairus' house. They're wailing and weeping, and they're saying, she's dead, don't waste your breath. And they laugh him to scorn. Verse 41. And Mike, you touched on this the other morning. Here's the thing about Jesus. Powerful. What a power. He's absolutely powerful, but also so personal. So personal. And he took the damsel, the one that was laying down there, by the hand, and said unto her, Talitha cumi. Talitha cumi, which is being interpreted, damsel, say unto thee, arise. He takes this little girl, knowing that daddy is under distress, knowing that daddy has a lot of things on his heart right now and he's broken. Jesus doesn't have to. Jesus could say, go home, Jairus. Go home. She's alive. That's all he had to do. But he decided to take the second and get down by this little girl and grab her by the hand. And the mommy and daddy are watching. He says, Talitha cumi. Arise. That Talitha, if you look at the one of the original translations, it's little lamb. Little lamb, rise. This girl's world was changed because the woman with the issue of blood stood up and spoke the truth. We have no idea what the alternative of that was.
Yeah, that's right.
Our country is the country it is today because 1745, George Whitefield said, I'm going to keep going. You say, oh, he wasn't a Baptist. I know that. But he paved the way for these men to fulfill what God had them to fulfill in their lives. Third John 1:4. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. Why would you sell that? How many times have I seen people sell that and their children go to the dogs? Why would you ever sell something like that? All that Jesus did for you, all the things that he all his long suffering toward you. This life's full of heartbreak. He never said it would be easy. In fact, it's quite opposite. Why would you sell something like that? In this country, the way things are shaping up, we need to have the resiliency to be able to say, I'm going to continue and press on for our children's sake.
Yes, sir.
For those little ones. Because every one of them is dying. This world is dying. People are dying. We are the only hope. We are the only hope. God's people we are the ground pillar of the truth. We are the only hope. And an entire nation was shaped. George Whitefield didn't know that outcome. He could have been in jail. And in fact, I read there was another testimony at one point where George Whitefield, one of the meetings that he was at, they hated him so badly that they found a little girl and they broke her arm. That's how mad and angry they were at George Whitefield. Doesn't feel like we're getting too far from that. My dad gave me a Bible. I never met my grandpa. I've told this story before. I never met my grandpa. I never got to meet my dad's dad. And he gave me a Bible. And I thought, cool, one of Grandpa's Bibles. I never got to meet him. So when he gave it to me, I opened it up and I had to hold back every tear I could because Grandpa had written in that Bible. And that's like the closest I can get to my grandfather. On this side of the world, that's the closest that I can get to Grandpa, is his handwritings in these Bibles. And I'll go through that every once in a while. I'll open that up and I'll look through that. To you, if it might go on the church shelf somewhere. You might see it in your church and go, someone left their Bible, and it might sit on the church shelf and just become a dusty Bible that's on the church shelf that nobody knows whose Bible that is. But to me, there's a connection there. There's something to it. I value that more than anything else. There's 100 Bibles out there. I want that one. It's that personal connection. And when we interact with Christ at the point of salvation, there's that personal connection. And when we go too long without engaging that connection, it just becomes another dusty Bible on the shelf. You're going to lose all that personableness. And you're going to forget all the things that he had done for you. It's his word. It's his truth. But he's gracious enough to use us